Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is the second in a newish series of videos looking at the faiths, the religions in the world of Ice and Fire. Today we're going to be looking at the faith of the Seven, the established religion in Westeros. Last time we looked at R'hllor, and we've got 3 or 4 more to be going on with over the next few weeks. So why don't we start as we usually do by just making sure we're all up to speed, a little bit of the background, where we're at in the story with them. The faith itself is an old faith. It's an ancient faith. We don't know quite how old or quite how ancient, but it hails from Essos, from the Andalos Hills. And there are, as is always the way of these things, legends around its beginning. So Hugor of the Hill is the sort of the founding father of this religion. He is said to have met the seven faces of God, and they each bless him in different ways. And this becomes the faith of the Andals. And as the Andals gravitate westwards, heading over to Westeros, they take their faith with them. And at this point, it is already quite an established faith for them. There are clearly books of the faith. There are clearly some sorts of religious orders associated with it, and some of the warriors who come across, they carve the symbol of the Seven into them just to show the depth of their faith. So this is a big and strong and old faith that we're talking about here. And when the Andals invade, we get lots. This isn't just one invasion. This is over centuries. This happens. We find that the people of Westeros slowly over time, south of the Neck, of course, it's all different up in the north, but south of the Neck, slowly but surely, the Andals come and integrate themselves within Westerosi society. And the first major house to completely welcome them are the Hightowers down in Old Town. Now, this is important because although when we look at the show, then the Hightowers didn't seem to be that important. Old Town was, at that time and through most of the history of Westeros, Old Town was the biggest city, the most important place, the center of culture and learning, commerce. This is the place to be. And the Hightowers, obviously, they ruled that, and they decided, rather than fight off all these Andals, let's embrace the Andal slow invasion. And they not only married into the Andals, but they then built a sept. The Hightowers built a sept right in the center of Old Town. In fact, one of 7, the Hightowers, they built 7 septs, immediately catching on to the idea that you do everything in sevens in the faith of the Seven. And they made that the home of the faith in Westeros, and that sept became known as the Starry Sept because it was so beautiful. The lights, this is a feature of a lot of the septs that we have around Westeros. Big windows, stained glass windows, light coming in, dazzlingly bright. And the Starry Sept is one of the most beautiful of all of these. So that was the situation we have, and over time, the faith integrates itself all the way through Westerosi culture, as we say. Not so much in the north. There are some septs in the north, but not many. Not so much in the Iron Islands. There was one attempt to get the Iron Islands in on the faith of the Seven by claiming that actually, you know what, the drowned god is the 8th god in the faith of the Seven, and tried to turn it into the faith of the 8, but that nobody liked that idea, so that one didn't work. And then also not so much down in Dawn, where obviously the Rhoynar have come in as well. But across the main bulk of Westeros, we have the faith of the Seven establishing itself as the predominant religion across the piece. Now, what this means is that there are dotted about, and I'll talk about the structures a little bit more later, but dotted around in every town and most villages, there are septs. sects. There are septons and septors, there are wandering priests, and everybody knows or has access to a member of this faith. There's also a huge amount of lay involvement, people who aren't ordained who get involved in it. So this is all-encompassing. When the Targaryens invaded, Aegon decided that what he wanted to do was he wanted to embrace the faith of the Seven. Now, he made this clear right from the beginning that the thing that he and his sisters did immediately before deciding to invade was they went to the sept that they'd handily built there on Dragonstone, and sought guidance there. They made sure that Aegon was crowned at the Starry Sept by the High Septon. And this not only, this went two ways, not only did this add some an extra layer of authenticity from the people's perspective to the idea that suddenly there was a king of this entire continent, but also for the faith of the Seven, this turned them just from being just this predominant religion across a geographical area in lots of different kingdoms to being the established religion. And this tied the Targaryens and the faith of the Seven together. This is what then this relationship between the Targaryens and the faith of the Seven was one of the key tensions that ran through the next 300 years of Targaryen rule, because the faith and the Targaryens didn't sit naturally well together. Yes, under Aegon and his sisters, that it seemed to work fine. That was largely because Aegon and his sisters were very strong rulers, and everybody just had these clear and strong memories of what happens if you just oppose the Targaryens at all. Fire and blood happens. When Aenys comes to the throne, this is Aenys the First, who is Aegon's successor. He's a lot weaker as a king, and immediately the faith of the Seven start rising up and pointing out the really quite glaringly obvious things that show quite how the Targaryens don't fit in with the faith of the Seven. Then there are two very clear problems that they have. The first is polygamy. Why on earth should you be allowed to marry more than one woman? The faith of the Seven is very clear on this. As a king, Aegon married two women, and incest, marrying brothers and sisters and all the rest of it. The faith of the Seven is dead set against that. They gave them a sort of a free pass during Aegon's reign. Under Aenys, it didn't happen, and we started getting faith uprisings. Now, it was these carried on through the time of Maegor. And that carried on not because he was a weak king so much as the fact that he just did not gain the love of the people, and so they had the faith as a whole was still opposing him. Now, there was a difference then between what was going on with the High Septon, who sometimes was a person of the faith who believed strongly in the beliefs of the faith, and sometimes the person elected as the High Septon seemed very much just to be in it because it was a cushy job. And those were the people who were happier to live at peace with the Targaryens. Anyway, Jaehaerys sorted it out, and under his wise leadership he came to an agreement with the faith, and the agreement basically was this this principle of exceptionalism, Targaryen exceptionalism. They called it a doctrine that basically said the Targaryens are different. We don't have to follow all the rules of the faith of the Seven. We can do what we want because we're Valyrians. And also in what the faith effectively gave up was the armed wing of the church, the faith militant. Jaehaerys said that faith militant did not need to exist because the crown would protect it. In exchange, what happened was that the faith were very much central and part of life in the Seven Kingdoms, and they had this central established role. Now, that sort of carried on all the way through. There were times when there were faith uprisings against, or mutterings at the very least, against the Targaryen rulers. There was one, Baelor the Blessed, who was incredibly devout, and he actually he made himself a septon. He followed all of the practices and beliefs of the faith of the Seven, and was in many ways really quite a zealot for it. So there was at least one clear exception, but broadly speaking, the Targaryens and the faith of the Seven just sort of coexisted. And then towards the end of the Targaryen rule, the center of gravity of the faith even moved to King's Landing. So when the Great Sept of Baelor was built, that was when the High Septon and the most devout, who are sort of like the cardinals, the most important people within the faith, they all moved across to King's Landing, therefore making it very much an establishment thing. This wasn't the church and the state in different places, hundreds of miles apart. They were in the same city. So that's the situation that's there. In the story that we've got, they start off just being clearly this very establishment, easy kind of religion, and we get the High Septon at the time was very much happy to just go along with what the crown wanted. But then we get the High Sparrow. So that High Septon dies tragically, and the poor fellows, the wandering lay people, have got a new champion from among them. The sparrows, I should call them. They are the people who are very poor but very devout, and they have a champion that they want placed as the High Septon, because they see this established religion which is not following the teachings of the religion, and so they break into the conclave where they're deciding who the new High Septon is going to be, and basically force the most devout to elect their person, who is the High Sparrow. And the High Sparrow immediately starts doing all sorts of radical things, like selling off the silverware, getting rid of all of the crowns and things like that, turning this established religion on its head, and using this money to be feeding the poor, doing actually good things. It turns out this High Sparrow is not just a good man, but incredibly devout and very much a zealot. Now, Cersei is trying to play him, and she tries to come to this deal. She thinks she's come to a deal that he will anoint Tommen to be the new king, because still the faith's blessing for a king is the important thing in the eyes of lots of people in the Seven Kingdoms. And if the High Septon refuses to anoint and crown the king, then that actually calls into doubt the validity of that monarch. She thinks that she's come to an agreement that he's going to do this. In exchange, she allows the faith militant, the military arm of the faith, to be re-established. This, clearly in very typical Cersei short-sighted fashion, this starts to blow up in her face. She tries to get rid of her rival Marjorie by coming up with lots of lies about her, getting her captured by the High Septon, but then again this turns on her, and she also gets caught up in this web of lies and the rest of it. So that's where in the books she has come back after her walk of shame, walk of penitence. She's back in the Red Keep, And we're still left with this problem of the High Sparrow, who has Marjorie. He's got Tommen there, who is needing to have the faith sort of officially say, yes, he's the king. And we're left in this very precarious position, which is sort of the equivalent on the show of a bit before when Cersei blew up the Great Sept. And we'll come on to whether she will do that in the books in a little while. But that's where we are. So that's a sort of a broad overview of the Faith of the Seven up to this point. As always, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to frame this around the questions that I got from my patrons. That's one of the benefits of being a patron of Deep Geek, is you get priority questions answered on these live streams. I'll try and get to as many questions from the chat as I possibly can as we're going through as well. Ryan Larkin, thank you so much for the super sticker just before we went live. And Stamford Bridge, thank you for the super chat saying 7 blessings, and 7 blessings to you as well. I think that's me caught up on questions in the chat, but do keep on dropping them as I get to some questions from my patrons thinking about the sort of the history and structure of the faith. So Catherine Furseth says, I wonder about the origin of the faith and if it has many myths and stories in common with other faiths. I particularly find the stranger interesting, since he is described as the face of death and the unknown and unknowable. Is this in any way connected to the idea of the great other and the long night? So the faith, just to be sort of clearish on their theology, they believe in one God with 7 faces, and the 7 faces are the mother, the father, the smith, the warrior, the maiden, the crone, and the stranger. Now, these are aspects of God, but they're sort of like, if you imagine the Trinity, one God but 3 facets, that kind of idea is what George R.R. Martin was trying to do with this. And yes, we will come on to it. Yes, he has acknowledged that the sort of the medieval Catholic Church in Europe was roughly what he was framing this on. It's not exactly, but that's the feel, is what was going on there. So that's what the sort of the faith is, or the belief is, in this one God with these 7 faces. So as far as the faith are concerned, no, you haven't got other gods elsewhere that we've not. The stranger is not another god, a baddie god or something like that. It's just of course, it's a natural part of life that death is there. And so that is where that's about. Do they have any linkages to other faiths? Well, they would probably say no. But of course, you get things like the many-faced God, who would consider the stranger one of the aspects of the God that they worship. So it's, in a way, that's a sort of an echo going on there. The Red Priests of R'hllor would view all of the Faith of the Seven as heresy and wrong. They would view their God, R'hllor, as being the only true God, and there is one opposite, the Great Other, and therefore the Faith of the Seven they would see as being just a part of the worship of the Great Other, effectively, if you're worshipping something that is not R'hllor. But for the Faith of the Seven, it may have roots that go back, as many of these faiths over in Essos do, all the way to the Long Night. That's absolutely true. But there aren't any specific links. For some, so for R'hllor, it seemed a lot clearer that yes, there you could draw links across there. They have their Azor Ahai myths and all the rest of it. There isn't that layer here. This appears to be very much a thing which manifested itself over in Andalos and then came across to Westeros, and did not bring with it a legend of the Long Night in the way that some of the other Eastern religions have got one. So the Westerosi legends of the Long Night tend to be the ones from the First Men, from the north, things like the Last Hero and the like. So this is a different faith to most of the other faiths that we have. Mara Lee, thank you so much for your super chat before we went on air, saying just a show of love, admiration, and appreciation for all the fabulous content on IDG. I'm loving all the great stories on the well-told tale. You are loved and the best. All my love to Dan. Dan's my dog. Thank you, Mara. You know how much I appreciate all of your support. And thank you. Talk about the well-told tale. That's my second channel. For anyone who doesn't know the well-told tale, I read audiobooks, I read stories. What I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever. I'm now working my way through some what classic science fiction short stories as well. I just literally today on the YouTube channel I've released The Pendulum, which was Ray Bradbury's first ever published story. So it's classic Ray Bradbury, and if you've never read Ray Bradbury, you really should. He's excellent. So I'm glad you're enjoying that, Mara. Oh, and thank you so much for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. That's fantastic. Thank you. So if you're a fan of classic science fiction, please do go and check out my second channel, The Well-Told Tale. But you also had a question, Mara, asking about comparing and contrasting Emperor Constantine and the early Christian church with Aegon the Conqueror's adoption of the faith of the Seven as the main religion in Westeros. This is clearly an inspiration. I don't think it's an exact echo, because with Constantine, then they had the Roman Empire already, and the Christian faith had been growing up within it, and they'd been trying to push down and oppress the Christian faith, sometimes more violently than others. And his change, his conversion, however much you believe that was him truthfully converting, it clearly had an element that was, this is politically useful, to accept this faith which had spread across most of the empire, and not just say it's okay, but now actually make this the faith. That is a clear link across to the kind of the feel that we've got going on here with Aegon the Conqueror. He came across to Westeros. There is a faith there already, and rather than tell everybody you have to worship our gods and do our things, he basically said, you do you, and I will get your main man to bless me, and then we'll just let it be. Aegon the Conqueror, yes, he came in and imposed his will across the continent, but he left things alone really quite a lot. He could have done huge amounts of different things, changed things all over the place if he wanted to. He left local laws as they were. If leaders in an area, the kings of an area, were willing to submit to him, then he left them there where they were. He did not change any of these social structures. All he did was create this new post of king of the Seven Kingdoms and put himself on the throne. That was what the change was. So yes, there is clearly an echo of what happened with Constantine. The difference is the Roman Empire pre-existed, and here Aegon came in and created the empire at the same time. Sam Klontz II saying, comparing the faith of the Seven to the old gods and the faith of R'hllor, it seems like the Seven are pretty feeble. Magic is heavy with the other two, but not so much with the Seven. Are there some instances of the Seven's power that I may have missed? This is the question I think I get asked the most in relation to the faith of the Seven. The short answer is no. I don't think you've missed things, and there is not a huge bit of faith of the Seven magic out there that we can point out and say this is definitely it. There are, however, lots of small instances of things that you could say are magical, or at least highly coincidental. So, for example, you get the elder brother who and that whole community you've got there, great skills of healing. Maybe they are just very good at healing, or maybe it is the faith. You get this time when Davos, just after the Battle of the Blackwater, he should have drowned and died and called out to the mother in the faith of the seven, and he heard the mother, and after that was rescued. And was that just him having sort of visions and ravings of a dying man? I mean, it's possible, but then the help did come. You get some interesting little moments when you get Kat, who visits when she's off with Rob. She visits a sept, and she prays to I think it's 5 aspects of the seven-faced God, and each of her prayers does sort of eerily come true. She doesn't pray for the things you might expect her to pray for, but the things she does pray for do seem to come true. So there's a lot of coincidences, and this is actually quite good writing, I think, George R. R. Martin. There's a lot of coincidences, and all of those things you could explain away. You could just say that just happened. But if you were a believer in the faith of the seven, you would take these as proof that that the faith is real. And that, I think, is what is George R. R. Martin is trying to show here, is a religion that it doesn't rely on the kinds of things we might see in the faith of R'hllor, with lots of showy fire magic and all the rest of it. It relies on faith. So that's what we've got going on here, is a religion that is very much faith in belief in the unseen, and it's an establishment rather than a big magical thing. And so we shouldn't, I think, be looking at this as, let's compare this with that or that with it. This is a different thing that George R. R. Martin has created. He's not created another a faith that has bits of magic going along with it. He has created a religion, an established religion, therefore, for Westeros. Question from Shannon I. Adams saying, "Hi, Robert. My first live stream question. Welcome. The Targaryens and the Faith of the Seven managed a rather tense alliance since the conquest, I would argue, almost exclusively out of political expediency. However, Baelor is obviously a true devotee of the faith, as were other members of the royal family, one would assume. When, in what generation, in your opinion, did the Targaryens move from exclusively political allies to converts to the faith?" My take is that he's almost, I mean, there were other devotees of the faith within the Targaryen family, but he's almost an anomaly in terms of the kings. The rest of the kings, they may have sort of paid lip service, but before that, you would say, no, definitely didn't. We had Maegor and Aegon and Jaehaerys and all the rest of it. They weren't faithful as far as the faith of the seven was concerned. The later kings as well, if you look at them, they're happily marrying their sisters and all the rest of it. So it's actually really Baelor is the exception. It's not that from this generation on they did, they became more devout. It was really around him. The difference that he brought in, though, was that he accelerated and cemented this establishment. So it was him who arranged for this great sept to be built, and so it was him who made sure that the establishment of the faith, the center of gravity of the faith, moved from Old Town to King's Landing, and that cemented the relationship between the faith and the church and the state. Tjokia, thank you for the super chat, saying the Davos incident is Deus ex machina, God in the works. You can argue this many different ways with the Davos incident. In fact, I was just yesterday, I did a pre-recording that I'm hoping to have got edited and up with Amanda from the Disputed Lands, and we were talking about Patchface of all people. So if you're interested in Patchface, keep an eye out for that one. But she mentioned this in passing, and she was coming out with yet more possibilities of what was going on there with Davos that are actually not connected either with him being getting the blessing of the seven, or this just being happy coincidence, but something else completely was going on there. So keep an eye out for that. But yes, this was necessary for the plot for Davos to survive, but it is also very clear that there is a theme, and this was again something that came out from my conversation with Amanda, was there is a theme of drowning and rebirth which is across the piece in A Song of Ice and Fire, with a lot of different people, and it's very interesting to try and map out. And this is obviously with the faith of the drowned god, Davos, Tyrion, Patchface, lots of different characters have this kind of drowning and being reborn again. Lady Stoneheart is another one as well. So working through what links them is a fascinating study. So I mean, to call it Deus Ex Machina, yes, this clearly was necessary in order for Davos to get to where he needed to be, but it also did have some really important themes which were being played through in that as well. Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola." In book 1, Ned is told that the crown has borrowed money from the faith. Where does the faith get its money from? Also, do you think the faith will play a role during Fagon's invasion of King's Landing or help him become king? I think what I'll do is answer the second bit about Fagon later on, because I've got a couple of other questions about that. But in terms of the money, where the faith gets its money from is lots of different places. They get people leave money to the faith. People obviously do the equivalent of sort of tithing and all the rest. They do not have to pay tax, or at least for a long time. We don't know whether that's still the case. They did not have to pay any taxes either. They were tax exempt. That allowed them to store up wealth. They have been around for a very long time. They can plan for a very long time, and so they can store up a huge amount of wealth as well, with lots of bequests and all the rest of it. The local septs seem to be relatively self-sustaining. The people locally support the sept in that place, so they've got lots of different sources of income going on. And yes, when the crown got into debt, when Robert Baratheon was living his party lifestyle and they were trying to get money from all over the place, one of the places that they borrowed money from was the faith, from the faith of the seven, which seems to imply that there wasn't, that the sort of tax exempt status had carried on. Otherwise, I'm sure they could have figured out some kind of write-off process, but that's by the by. That's accountancy nerdy detail. But yes, they have gained money through bequests and the like over a huge period of time. They have been given lands, and those lands also provide them with an income. And so that is how they arrived at the place they're at. Kevin Warner, any thoughts on the House of the Dragon casting, and what was the Faith of the Seven's role during the Dance of the Dragons? Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on that. So we've had our first formal announcement of a cast, or a casting for House of the Dragon, which is Paddy Considine, who you may know from things like Peaky Blinders, has been cast as King Viserys the First. Now, this, I've couple of thoughts. First, excellent bit of casting. He's a really good actor, and I think he's going to be excellent. But in terms of the sort of the wider implications of this, Viserys' death is what caused the Dance of the Dragons, or it didn't cause it, but it was the spark. So for him to be cast clearly implies that the starting point of this is after Jaehaerys' death and before the Dance of the Dragons. So season 1 is almost certainly the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons. We're not going to go straight in with dragon fighting and all the rest of it, unless they're doing a series of flashbacks, which I suspect they're probably not. We are, I think, going to get something along the lines of the feel of season 1 of Game of Thrones, with the kind of the Ned Stark thing, which is you get a character who lasts through most of the first season and then dies, and it's the death that starts to spark a huge amounts of events afterwards. Now, the interesting thing for me was and I haven't got it all memorized, but they released a little bit of sort of descriptive blurb alongside it, which the casting to explain who this king was, and it was comparing him to Jaehaerys and saying, you know, compared to Jaehaerys, the old wise, his predecessor king, the old wise king, this is, you know, Viserys turned out to be weaker and all the rest of it. So that does seem to imply we're not just going to go into the last few years of his reign. We might be getting a bit of a build-up showing how people are disappointed in this king and what that might mean for their political sympathies going forward. In terms of the second half of your question about the role of the Faith of the Seven, I don't think they played a huge role. Now, I've said I'm rereading or listening my way back through Fire and Blood at the moment, so it may well be that on a second read through of this, I've sort of obviously read a few other times through several bits of this, but when I'm going through this, it may well be that a few things stand out a bit more, but my overriding feeling is that they were not the major players here. There is a conspiracy theory that perhaps we'll touch on later, which is that the Maesters and the Faith and House Hightower were very happy for the Targaryens to fight each other. That, although I don't fully subscribe to it, is a theory that I quite like, because they all have, for their various reasons, a joint interest in ensuring the Targaryens either go away or are diminished in power significantly. So I would say that the Faith did not cause the Dance of the Dragons, but it was very happy to allow it to carry on. But I will come back to this in a couple of weeks and let you know if I've got any additional thoughts on that one, because I think it is quite interesting. Victoria Gill, any link that the Stark children being raised in the Faith and the Sept being built up at Winterfell as a foreshadowing of the North and the Stark's fate? I don't think so. I think that there was a time a few years ago when within the fandom people were trying to make lots of links between the Stark children and the Stark family and the Faith of the Seven. I think thankfully that's gone away. I don't personally see that is a link or foreshadowing that George R. R. Martin has been trying to bring out. This, I think, is more of a reflection of the character building that George R. R. Martin was trying to do with Ned and Cat. And this is to show that the North, A, has forgotten because he's built a sept in Winterfell, but B, this shows that he is the person who puts family first. He's willing to break traditions. He's willing to do everything to make things right for his family, because this woman that he married without ever having met her before comes all the way up to Winterfell, and he bends over backwards to try and make her feel at home. He allows her to bring her maester with her, and then that maester becomes the maester to Ned Stark. She allows this. He says, "Let's build a sept here. We'll have a scepter here who is training and teaching the children." He does everything he can for her, and that shows us his character. And it plays over into what happens with the children to an extent. That extent is that we get them being a lot more aware of the Seven Kingdoms and looking to the south than perhaps they might otherwise be. Sansa gets her love for the south and this idea, this rose-tinted idea of what it's like down in King's Landing, all the rest of it, through this injection of sort of southern teaching rather than through the northern teaching that she might otherwise get. So I don't think it's foreshadowing, but I think it's very good character building. Okay, let's go to a question from Wolf Wilson. Actually, this is picking up on what we were talking about just a moment ago. So I will, with the conspiracy, saying both the Faith and the Maesters seem to be anti-dragon, anti-magic, and anti-Targaryen. Is this where their complicity, if there is any, ends, or do they have larger combined goals for Westeros? So this is one of those things where the High Towers in Old Town are linked inextricably with both the Maesters. They founded the Citadel, and the Faith of the Seven. They founded the Starry Sept, and the High Towers are inextricably linked with both of those two huge organizations, which mirror each other in many ways as being the cross-continental organizations who support the infrastructure of what's going on. So the Maesters teach, they write, they are in charge of the mail, they advise the powers that be. You get the septons and scepters are out there marrying people and sort of judging things and acting as moral guides. So you get the infrastructure, the social infrastructure of the Seven Kingdoms is based on these two organizations that come from Old Town and the High Towers. Now, both have a vested interest in trying to hold back or prevent the incursions of magic and the Targaryens, whether they wish to say it or not. The Targaryens are very much, and always have been very much, obviously focused in on fire and all the rest of it, and the Maesters' power receded as the pyromancer's power increased. This was a sort of a battle between these two, certainly within King's Landing, as to which had the greater power. Also, we've already talked about the fact that there was always a tension between the Targaryens' marital practices and the teachings of the Faith of the Seven. So there is clearly a motivation for both of these organizations to be pushing against the Targaryens. And I would subscribe to this idea that the Maesters have definitely been pushing behind the scenes. I think that they had a hand in the Doom of Valyria. I did a video on that ages ago. If you're at all interested in that one, I think that yes, they definitely had a hand in the the ending of the dragons after the Dance of the Dragons, when the dragons just sort of withered and died. I think that was definitely part of their doing. The question is, what about the dance itself? Might that be their fault in some way? Because this was the height of the Targaryens, and you would probably say this was the last time that this kind of thing could possibly happen to end the rule of the Targaryens and the dragons and all the rest of it, because the Targaryen family was getting bigger and bigger, and they were getting more and more dragons. There were 20-something at the height of it. And it seems very coincidental that the family who were pushing hardest all the way through this, who prompted this civil war, were the Hightowers. So it's everything sort of adds up, but there's no smoking gun. We haven't got anything that says this is definitely what happened. So I'm happy to entertain these kind of theories, but I don't think we've got the evidence yet to say that they are definitely true. Art Yokia saying, when is the Quentin video coming out? Collaboration with Preston Jacobs? Question or debate? So I mentioned last week that I'm doing a video about whether Quentin Martell is still alive. That is coming out hopefully tomorrow. I'll see whether I can get that one out tomorrow. It's not a collaboration with Preston Jacobs or a debate. I would love to work with Preston at some point. He seems to have some really interesting theories. I've not watched any of his videos for a very long time, but I'm sure he's still producing them. So yes, he's definitely on my list of people to collaborate with at some point. But yeah, the Quentin video is coming out hopefully tomorrow. I think that's me caught up on the questions in the chat. Eric Fuchs asks, what actually killed Septon Moon? The poison in the tent, the suspicious woman, a shadow baby, who was behind it? Right, so this is a question from Fire and Blood. Septon Moon, I talked about this sort of in outline earlier. But the after the original 3 Targaryens, or Aegon, had died, Aenys took over, was a lot weaker, and there were lots of little rebellions appeared all over the place. One of these was outside Old Town, led by, and it was a faith rebellion, and it was led by this guy called Septon Moon. Now, Septon Moon was this, sounds like a larger than life character. He was, it would appear, a Septon, but and we should always take what we read in Fire and Blood with a pinch of salt, because it's clearly written by people with an agenda. But he appears to be somebody who, although he preached all these kind of great rabble-rousing sermons, he then spent his evenings getting drunk and inviting a variety of women into his tent. So that seems to have been what was there. However, around him grew up this huge sort of tented city deep in the woods, around the outside of Old Town, and there was this standoff that lasted for years, really. As I say, Maegor's reign came and went, and they were, the Septon Moon railed against the High Septon. He called him the High Lickspittle, because he was there refusing to denounce the Targaryens, and they were wanting to come in to Old Town, but the gates were shut to them, and they basically stayed a bit of a nuisance for a very long time. And then when Jaehaerys came to the throne, they had a problem, because they wanted Jaehaerys to be crowned king in Old Town, Now, he could obviously sort of just come in and land on his dragon, but for everyone else to get in, they still had this problem of the Septon Moon and his group outside the city, and so they were trying to work out what do they do about this, and Jaehaerys was absolutely adamant he did need to after all these uprisings, he did need to make sure that he was crowned properly by the High Septon. So they try and work out what to do, and they come up with lots of different ideas. And then suddenly, miraculously, the problem seems to solve itself. He gets killed, and the people gathered around him all start to dissipate, and it's all okay again. Now, we get an account of what and how he was killed. And apparently, late one night, a woman comes to his tent where there are guards there, and she's carrying a flagon of wine, and she says, can I come in there? And they go, yeah, go on, that's fine. She goes in, they hear laughter from the inside, and then suddenly there's screams. She bursts out, heads out into the night, never to be seen again. And then Septon Moon himself bursts out of the tent, and his throat appears to be cut, and he's kind of like staggers around the camp for ages in what sounds like quite a faintly tragic but faintly comical way, and dies. And they try and work out, well, who did it? It seemed that this woman seems to be the most likely person, but she went in with this flagon of wine, and a few people tried the flagon of wine and they died. The wine was poisoned. But then why, if it was poisoned wine, why cut his throat? The whole thing's a bit of a mystery, and no one ever claims credit. So that's the kind of riddle that George R. Martin left a lot in Fire and Blood, to be honest. And everyone actually was quite happy. It doesn't matter. The problem got solved and they just moved on. In terms of who did it, though, I think that there are a few likely candidates. Now, it's possible that, somebody hired a professional assassin to do this. People talk that there was talk of the Faceless Men. Could the Faceless Men have done it? It doesn't feel like a Faceless Men kind of assassination, because it was a botched job. The Faceless Men kill somebody straight away. They don't sort of half cut their neck and then let them stagger around afterwards. That it doesn't feel like that kind of professional job. But it does clearly seem like somebody who understood that, he had women coming into his tent every night. So that was the way to get in there. Who was behind this? Well, I think that there are two possible options. I think one possible option is that there were two knights who had taken the side of Septon Moon. They were the Lords Oakheart and Rowan, and they'd taken the side of Septon Moon and had stuck with him, and the rumors were that they were starting to get a little bit second guessing themselves, thinking maybe they chose the wrong side here, because suddenly this was starting to look like it was a losing cause. And immediately after the death of Septon Moon, they immediately got out of there and pronounced their faith and loyalty to Jaehaerys. So it almost feels as if they were aware of it or were expecting it to happen at the very least. So they are quite likely, in my view. And also, incidentally, they wouldn't ever wish to claim credit for it because they were part of this. Their ideal position would be for people to think that they served their role and did the right thing with these people standing up for the faith. But then the moment that this was over, they then immediately went and saw the error of their ways. That was their story, and so it worked well for them. The other possibly would be the Hightowers. The Hightowers were in a very awkward position because this was outside their gates, and they did not want the king to be against them. The king was already suspicious of the Lord Hightower at the time, and so it's entirely possible that they thought the easiest way is let's just get rid of this person. We don't want to send the soldiers out there and cause the bloodbath, because they did have the sympathy of some of the common people. So let's just end it by getting rid of the main person. So yeah, those are the options. If I had to guess, it would be those two lords, Oakhart and Rowan, but we don't know. And the point of the story is that it actually doesn't matter, because almost everybody in the Seven Kingdoms at that point, outside of that camp, wanted Septon Moon dead. Whoever it was doesn't matter so much, the fact that it was moved on, and life, the reign of Jaehaerys could start in the way that he wanted it to. Esoteric, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, I'm so glad I found you. Your videos are so amazing and informative. You are very talented at what you do. Thank you. That's really kind. Will you ever do a history and lore on the Martells and Tyrells? Would be nice. Take care. Yeah, I've done one on the Tyrells quite recently, I think, only a few weeks ago. A live stream. And the Martells, I don't think I badged it as a history and lore video, but I definitely did do a live stream on the Martells as a sort of a follow-up to a series of videos I did on Doran's plans. So if you check back, if the easiest thing to do is if you go onto my channel, you find there's a playlist called something like live streams. Flick through that and you should be able to find live streams on both of those two things. But thank you for your kind words. That's very very kind. Question from Vera Bennett saying, hi Robert, I'm fascinated by the Maesters. Did they all follow the Seven? Live stream on the Maesters would be great. Huge thanks from Melbourne. Hi Melbourne. Well, so a live stream on the Maesters, yes. I think at the moment I'm working the way through the religions, and then after that, perhaps I'll move on to like the organizations. So maybe yeah, we'll go on to the Maesters in a few weeks' time. Do they all follow the Seven? Not necessarily, but they are all they're all good members of the Seven Kingdoms. And so yes, they sort of work with them. Now the kind of implication is that the Maesters are they're probably not the most devout, but they're sort of given over to their studies and they believe in learning and intellectualism and all the rest of it rather than faith, but they work happily with the faith of the Seven because they don't actually bother them that much. I think their Maesters are far more concerned by religions that have a purely magical element to them, because the Maesters, just to sort of rewind on that, one of the key things, if you're going to become a Maester, one of the key things that you have to do is you get locked into this dark room for the night, a sort of a cell with the dragon glass candles, the glass candles, and you're supposed to then try and get them to light. And the whole point is that you can't, because magic doesn't work. That's the whole idea. Now, recently, they can light, so they've been kind of proven wrong on that one. But for the very fact that this was one of the sort of the initiation rites of becoming a Maester shows quite how anti-magic they are. But they were happy to work alongside the faith of the Seven because, as we've noted, they're not the most magical. The magic that does happen, if it does happen, seems to be a lot more faith-driven and coincidental rather than anything else. Michael Rector saying, do Masters have to serve? I think that's Maesters have to serve for life, as you see with the Night's Watch and Kingsguard. I've read the books many times and don't recall if there is a penalty. Well, so No, they don't have to. They can abandon what their sort of calling is. It's not a penalty to go off and become a maester. And there are some who get cast out, like Qyburn, for example. So it's not a thing that you're there for life and you only ever leave it in a body bag. That's not the way that this works. The thing which is probably most relevant here is that actually there are lots of nearly maesters who just have gone out into the world. You'll find there are lots of people who have got one or two links in their chain and then basically didn't do any more. And they make their living being scribes or advisors or things like that. Or there are some who just wanted to learn about certain things and head out. So Oberyn Martell, for example, I think he got 5 links in his chain. There's no indication he actually wanted to be a maester himself. He wanted to learn particular things. So no is the short answer. It's not like a sentence like you get going to the Night's Watch. You have to do this for life. But it's in most instances, it seems that you are there for life. So you get Maester Walgrave, Archmaester Walgrave, who we see in A Dancer with Dragons, who seems to be very old and very decrepit, but they allow him to carry on. It's very much this kind of feel that it is a job for life, but you don't have to be there forever. It's not a sentence to do it, if that makes sense. Question from Catherine Kernco. No question. Thank you so much. Saying, just showing my appreciation for my new favorite YouTube channel. Thank you, Robert, for the amazing content and for keeping me sane amidst the quarantine. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's very kind. If I can keep people sane during this time, then that's I'll consider my time very well spent. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. Question from Guinevere Greenstones. Do you think that the faith has an efficient system to communicate the latest dogma around Westeros? It seems the Citadel are much better at this. This is interesting because my initial thought when I read this question was, yeah, the Maesters have got a much better way of doing it. But then I thought, actually, I think they're focused on different things. So the Maesters have this very strong hold on the upper classes. We see the Maesters a lot because we're shown the world of A Song of Ice and Fire through the eyes of the 1%, the lords and ladies, the top tier of society. And so we see the Maesters advising. We see the Maesters teaching the children of the nobles. We see the Maesters writing the mail, reading the mail, being in charge of the communications across the piece. And yes, this does give them a huge amount of influence and ability to teach people what they want taught. So Maester Luwin teaches Bran, but as part of this, he is teaching him, no, magic doesn't exist. All these things are fairy tales, etc., etc. That is the dogma of the Maesters coming through. The faith, though, operate a lot more at a ground level with the normal people. Yes, they operate at a high level as well. There are, as well as the High Septon, all of the main families seem to have a septon attached to a sept, which is in their area, and often a scepter, who is sort of like a governess. So the Stark children effectively have a scepter who's being a governess to them. And so, yes, they do operate at that high level as well. But with the Faith of the Seven, they operate at a village level, at a local level. They have septs all over the place that people attend. This is part of everyday life for people. There are traveling septons who go around. There are lay orders that people can join up and do things in, live in quiet contemplation, look after the dead bodies, and all of this. They're working at a very, very granular ground level, and that is what allows them to be spreading their dogma. And I think it's quite telling that when we get this doctrine of exceptionalism that Jaehaerys introduced, which was his way of saying, you know what, the faith doesn't apply to us Targaryens because we're different and better and all the rest of it. He sent out these 7 speakers to go across the land, and they seem to have been a combination of the highborn and the lowborn, talking in courts, but also going out to the people in the way that traveling septons tended to do, going from place to place and just talking to random people here and there. And he seems to have this instinctive grasp, but this is how you do this. If you're trying to win over the people, you don't just try and win over the lords of the top. You want the people as a whole to be coming on your side. So I think it's not a matter of does one system work better than the other in terms of sort of spreading their worldview. I think both the faith and the Maesters have got ways of spreading their beliefs which complement each other and have huge coverage over all of Westeros. Archiokia, thank you again, saying, why celibacy in so many organizations? No widows to provide for. Celibacy, it's I think George R. Martin was basing a lot of this on the kind of the medieval church and orders that there were around at the time, and that was very much one of the key things, and as a way to focus your attention entirely on something. So I think that this was just him being true to human nature, and large organizations of that ilk have often had these kind of vows of celibacy, with this idea that, you know, if you're married, then you're focusing your attention and energy somewhere else. We want them 100% here, focused on being a septon, being a maester, being whatever. So that's where that comes from, and I think it's just George R. R. Martin trying to reflect a lot of how humanity works and organizations work. Kayla Richardson, my question is about the hierarchy of the faith. What are the different positions one could hold in service to the faith, and how could one go from a poor fellow to becoming a high septon? Right. Well, I'll just sort of break this one down because it is quite detailed, actually. George R. Martin's given us quite a lot. There are, first of all, you get this kind of I'll be talking a lot about the lay membership. You get holy brothers and sisters. They're the people who maybe they sort of shave the tonsure over their head, like sort of a monk style. Maybe they go and join a septry best example of this actually is the Quiet Isle. You get a huge amount of people who are there living this holy spiritual life, people who have devoted themselves to the faith in some way. They're not all septors and septons. There's not just a load of priests. There's this kind of lay membership of people who do stuff. Now, these septries run or organized by the elder brother, assisted by some proctors. So this, if you think of these as being like abbeys in a way, so these are you get the abbot and a few other people around, but then you have a much wider community that operates around them, and that's what the Quiet Isle is like, and there are quite a few of these other septries dotted around the landscape as well. Then we get the septors and septons. They're the priest, or the septons are the priests, the septors, the female equivalent. They do break down this sort of the gender divide quite a lot in the Faith of the Seven. with different roles for different genders. So the septons are quite often attached to a specific sept, so they have their church effectively, although some of them are traveling around from place to place. If you get very small village and rural communities, then they can't afford to have their own sept and look after a septon themselves, so they might have one who sort of travels around on a sort of a circuit for the course of over the course of every few months or something like that. So that's where they come in. Then we get a whole series of other orders associated with this. So the Silent Sisters are they're an order devoted to the dead and the dead bodies and looking after them. You get the Faith Militant that we've talked about a few times. That's got a couple of different levels. You get the Warrior's Sons, who are the nobility effectively, and then you get the Poor Fellows, who are the rest. So you get these two levels within the Faith Militant. Then going back to sort of the ordained, you get the sort of imagine like conclave of cardinals, they're called, the most devout. They are the people who are at the top of the church, and the very top, the popish figure, is the High Septon. So that's what it is. Now, in order to be made the High Septon, normally you have to have been one of the most devout. Normally, but not always. There's a couple of exceptions. We've already talked about one of them with how the High Sparrow was made. The High Septon, Baelor the Blessed, also had a couple of, let's call them, idiosyncratic choices as well. But normally, if the route is up from being a septon up to being one of the most devout, then you might become the High Septon. So that's the route you go. Question from Sylvester Snow. Are there any holy days that the faith observes? Is there a Christmas-like day where they celebrate the birth of Hugor of the Hill, or a day of atonement like Yom Kippur? Right, so they do have holy days. Each of the 7 has a specific holy day. So the 7 aspects of God. And some people predominantly worship different aspects of this. So yes, although everybody can worship all 7 aspects of the one God, and you can pray to all 7 aspects and all the rest of it, there are some people who particularly devote themselves to one of the 7 aspects because you're a warrior, or you have the maiden that you hold up as being this sort of divine female, or whatever it is. You may follow one particular aspect, and if you do, that's the time you get a holy day for it. There's also a holy of holies day, like their equivalent, I guess, of Christmas, which is on the 7th day of the 7th moon of the year. So on the 7th of the 7th, the Faith of the 7 celebrate their special day. So that's what they have got going on. Berus Aurelius, do the morality or values of the Faith of the 7 as expressed by the monks of the Quiet Isle have any role to play in bringing peace to Westeros, or just an ideal that some like Sandor believe in? Interesting. So I fear for the Quiet Isle. I have to say, I don't think they're going to last very long. They give me every impression, if anyone's been to Holy Island off the northeast coast of England, then or Lindisfarne, it's got that kind of feel to it, of this set apart religious community that will inevitably at some point get completely ransacked by bad people. So that's the kind of idea that I think we're going to have here. Do they have any role in the end game? I hope so, but I think it's more in terms of mopping up and helping this broken men idea. So we had Septim Merrybold gave this speech about broken men that and it's a very powerful, moving speech, and basically he talks about the way that war breaks people, and particularly the combatants in war, but also other people who are affected by it, and they get completely broken. But then maybe out of this, we can get death and rebirth and all the rest of it. And that is very much what happened with the elder brother from the story that he tells. That it seems to be what's going on with the Hound. And as we know, this idea of broken men or broken people is one of the key themes that George R. R. Martin keeps on coming back to this. It is the broken people, the cripples, bastards, and broken things. They are the ones who will inherit in some way, or they will survive in some way. So that, I think, is what we're going to see the role there of things like the Quiet Isle. It's not that faith is going to particularly survive, but I hope that element is going to play out hugely as we go forward. The people who do survive to the end game increasingly will be people who have been broken by what has happened and have had to rebuild themselves in some way. And that is what is exemplified by things like the Quiet Isle. Gerard Howard saying, isn't it ironic that Septim Bath, whose writings are considered sacrilegious by the faith and wrong by the Citadel, is pretty much right every time? Yes, it is ironic. We don't know that he was right every time, but he certainly seems to have been right quite a lot. He wrote some books that the more zealotish part of the faith then disowned and got burned. So Baelor the Blessed ordered the burning of a lot of Septim Bath's books. Now, yes, if anything, he comes across more as a maester in his way of thinking than he does actually a Septon or a member of the faith. Whenever we read from his perspective through Fire and Blood, he seems incredibly rational and reflective of what is going on around him, and doesn't consider himself to be a particularly pious man. He seems to be a very good man, but he doesn't consider himself to be, particularly pious or part of this, the religion, as it were. He doesn't think that he would be a good choice to be the High Septon, for example, when Jaehaerys has this crazy idea that he should be. So yes, it is indeed ironic. And the fact that he has written these books that have been burned then means that we can have, and George R. R. Martin has created this character that we can largely trust, then means that the hunting for those books, which is part of what's going on now in Old Town, actually has this extra resonance, because if we just had a random book about dragons, then it would mean nothing. If we've got a book that we think we can trust about dragons, that is a very, very different matter. Michael Rector saying, loved the recent History of House Tully stream. With so much coverage of Stark, Lannister, etc., it was very informative to learn about a less talked about house. Love to see more streams like that. Thank you. I will endeavour to do that. I think my plan for these streams for the next month or two is I'm going to work through the faiths of Westeros. So we're going to talk about the faith of the Rhoynar. We're going to talk about the drowned god faith, and then probably a few other random, the old gods, obviously, and then a few other random sort of Asozi ones. Then I think, as I was saying earlier, we're going to come back and talk about some of the great establishment organizations within Westeros. So we'll talk about perhaps the Maesters, and then maybe even go back and talk about the Faceless Men, things like that. So some of the organizations that we've got going on there. Then yes, I would love to come back and do a few more of the houses. I'm not sure there's any that because I've covered quite a few of them recently. I don't know that there's any particular ones that I've missed, but do let me know in the chat if there are any that you particularly like me to see. But yes, I will definitely get to them as soon as I can. Andrew K, yes, the Quiet Isle is considered a secretary. That's what it is. So it's effectively an abbey, if you think of it like a medieval abbey, not just being a sort of a big building, but a community that sort of is relatively self-sufficient. Fodder for foreshadowing, thank you so much, saying, as Catelyn Stark was one of the most devout that we see, how do you see Lady Stoneheart as a R'hllor White interacting with the faith? Well, so she's lost a lot, and what is left of her is the thing that is driving her now, which is this need for revenge. We don't really see her reaction to this idea that she's being brought back by R'hllor. She is one of, and this is very clear that George R. R. Martin, particularly around this kind of Riverlands area, things to do with the Brotherhood Without Banners, he's mixing up a lot of the different faiths and magic types just to keep us on our toes, so we don't know. We can't just sort of say this is that religion, this is the other one. Beric Dondarrion is the classic example, is that he clearly follows the faith of the Seven, yet we're introduced to him when he's sitting in what is described as a weirwood throne, and then clearly he's brought back to life through this R'hllor ritual. So what's going on there? That all seems quite confusing. Lady Stoneheart, again, seems to have been brought back by this R'hllor ritual. However, she has all of these overtones of being part of the drowned god kind of faith. She's pulled out from this water, and then is given this sort of the kiss of life, which seems very much like what happens over on the Iron Islands. And how is she brought out of the water? Well, she's rescued by Nymeria, a direwolf who's being walked there by Arya. So that's got an old gods thing going on as well. So this all kind of mixes in together, and George R. R. Martin does not want us to be able to point at one religion and say that is what is running things here. He wants us to think of this as all being rather muddy. But how she's going to see herself interacting with faith and all the rest of it, I don't think that she's thinking about religion at all at the moment. I don't think that's where she's going with this. I think that this is now how others see her role. So we get Thoros of Myr, who's sticking around because he thinks she must be here for a reason. She's been brought back for a reason, and he's hanging around because he thinks that maybe he's got some role in this going forward. So I don't think that she's going to, I mean, if she comes across random septons and all the rest of it, then yes, she's probably going to be going easy on them, but this is not about her faith anymore. This is about her family, and this is about revenge. Archiokia saying Clegane Bowl get hype. I talked about that. I did a live stream all about the Hound a little while ago, so if you're interested in my thoughts on that, then please do go and check that one out. Did I have any more questions? I think I had Reflective rambling. Thank you so much. Saying the faith will play politics to thrive. As a financial source, are their interests aligned or at odds with the banks? Could these debts or magic revival shift the faith's influence post-war reconstruction? How to answer that one? So, are their interests aligned with or at odds with the banks? Well, they probably, like the banks and like the Maesters, they are wanting to have a stable world. They don't want, if there to be wars going on all the time. They don't want lots of ups and downs. They don't want dragons, frankly, because they cause huge amounts of dangerous stuff going on, and actually what they want is stability, as the banks do. They don't want to have to be shifting their support from one king to another all the time. They want to have somebody who's paying their debts, then taking on new debts, and then paying them back. That's what they want. The faith, probably as an establishment, were very happy being at the center of things, and being seen as, they're the one who says, yes, this person is king. They would love that. But the thing that comes out the more you read about the Faith of the Seven is that this is not just one overall set of beliefs that and about behavior that everybody sticks to. There are huge differences between different parts of the faith. You get the High Sparrow, who's completely different to the previous High Septon, who is completely different to the elder brother, who is completely different to lots of the scepters that we might see. You get lots of different people groups who see that and interpret their faith in different ways, because this is a faith which is interpretable, because it has got 7 aspects of one God to start with, but also because it is not unlike, say, the worship of a law. This is not so much of a proselytizing religion for most people. It doesn't go out there saying everybody else is evil and wrong, we have to go and convert them. It seems relatively happy just being where it is. So it is conservative with a small c, in terms of wanting to keep things as they are. And in terms of the influence post-war reconstruction, I've got a question on that, which I will answer at I think it's towards the end of the series of questions from my patrons. So I will wrap this one up in that, if that is okay. Josh Stewart, thank you very much, just saying the playlists get him through the long days at work. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. It's one of the reasons I create the playlist, is that so you can just click on it and it goes all the way through. Let's go to a question from Julie Erickson. In Andal history, many things seem to come in numbers of 7, just like things often come in 3s in Christianity. This does most likely not mean that the Andals actually had 7 of everything, just that they like to tell their stories that way. However, I have always wondered why they ended up having precisely 7 kingdoms. Do you think it is just by chance, or is it in some way intentional by George R. R. Martin? This is intentional, not by George R. R. Martin, but I think it was intentional by Aegon to call himself the king of the 7 kingdoms. Because if you add up, it was almost never, if ever, 7 kingdoms. First of all, they didn't invade Dawn, and Dawn didn't. Dawn hung out for best part of a couple of centuries, to be honest. So yeah, there might have been 7 kingdoms, but the king did not rule 7 kingdoms. But and Aegon crowned himself first the king of the 7 kingdoms, even before he got people to bend the knee for him, so he just assumed that everyone would. But then once it became apparent that Dawn was not submitting, he still carried on saying that he was the king of the Seven Kingdoms. So I think that this is deliberate, because, as you say, 7 is a holy number for the faith of 7, obviously, and so he wanted to keep that. Now, if you start to think, well, actually, what regions are there that king rules? Theoretically, you get the North, you get the Vale, you get the Riverlands, you get the Iron Islands, you get the Westlands, you get the Reach, Dawn, Stormlands, and Crownlands. Actually, you're up to 9. So it's called Seven Kingdoms. Yes, I think they just kept the title because it was the title that worked well with the Faith of the 7. And my lover Nicole saying, hey Robert, a few questions. You've talked about the magic of the 7. Could you explain what you mean by that? I think I've covered off that one a little bit ago. And when Davos almost drowned during the Battle of the Blackwater and he saw the mother, did he see his mother, and did the 7 save him? So yeah, I think that this was very much a matter of we're being left to interpret this. It could be either way, but I think the implication was that he saw the mother, not his mother. He saw the mother. The question is whether or not that means that the 7 saved him, or whether this was just he was going to be saved anyway. Louis Dantas saying the number is fairly arbitrary. You could argue that the Riverlands are part of other realms, for instance. Yeah, indeed. So the Riverlands were, when they started off, the Riverlands were part of the Kingdom of the Isles on the Rivers with the Iron Islands. So the number is relatively arbitrary, as you say. It's that they picked the 7 kingdoms because it was a good number. Mrs. Castle Dreams saying, hi Robert, if I remember correctly, Tommen hasn't actually been blessed by the High Septon yet. It was agreed on but never done. Is that right? And if so, do you think the faith will support young Griff and help remove the Lannisters from the throne? So yeah, this was all part of what Cersei thinks she'd had agreement from with the High Sparrow. Well, she did get agreement on from the High Sparrow. The faith militant came back, and they were going, and High Sparrow was going to formally bless King Tommen. Now, we have not seen that happen. The clear implication is that it has not happened yet. She invites the High Sparrow up to the Red Keep several times. He doesn't come up. One time he sends other people up there. So the clear implication is that he hasn't. Now, the other aspect of this, which I think is quite interesting, is that when you get the very final, the epilogue, the final chapter of A Dance with Dragons, when you get Varys killing Kevin Lannister, he gives a lot of reasons for it. Basically, he monologues. We forgive him because he's cool and he's telling us good information. But he basically says, I'm doing this to you, Kevin, not because I dislike you, but because, frankly, you're competent and you're doing a good job and you are getting in my way for what I am trying to achieve. What Varys is trying to achieve is laying the ground for the invasion of Aegon. And he's saying that, you're keeping the Lannisters and the Tyrells together, and you're also doing good things to get the faith on your side, get the High Sparrow to be blessing Tommen. So clearly Varys sees this as being important, that Tommen does not get that blessing. Now, will the faith support young Griff? This all depends, and on what happens next with Cersei. So I think, and I know, Mara Lee, I know that you asked about this one, whether or not Cersei is going to be doing the same thing in the books as she did on the show, blowing up the Great Sept. I did a video on that a few weeks ago if you want my detailed thoughts about that one. But broadly speaking, the answer is Probably yes, or if not that, then something quite similar. Cersei's going to look around. She's going to blame, almost certainly, because Varys is going to frame them, she's going to blame the Tyrells for the killing of Kevin Lannister. She's got a huge grudge against the High Septon, and she's starting to realize that allowing the faith militant back in was not a good idea. So what's she going to do? She's also started getting this slightly obsessed by wildfire when she used wildfire on the Tower of the Hand. The language is pretty astonishing, and she's there, she sees, thinks it's beautiful. Jaime comes up, looks at her, talks to her, and says she's sounding like Mad King Aerys when he was talking about wildfire. So clearly she's going to use it again. So probably, and if she does blow it up or do something similar, then that is not going to get them on her side. They are going to be on someone else's side. The Faith are going to be against the Lannisters. The Faith are going to hate Cersei Lannister. Not just the sort of the administrative center of the Faith, but all of the lay members of the Faith around the country. They're going to rise up against her, and they will almost certainly therefore welcome Aegon as he is trying to get rid of Cersei. So will they play a role to support young Griff? Yes, but I think only because they are trying to get rid of Cersei. And this probably means that actually one of the things that young Griff is going to be doing is taking on, rather intriguingly, this kind of Jaehaerys the First kind of vibe. So he's going to be coming in after this evil monarch who the Faith were up in arms against, and he is then probably going to get the blessing and get rid of the Faith militant, but also get them on his side. That seems to be the vibe that we're getting here. So almost certainly, yes, the Faith will start to come in on his side rather than Cersei's side. Launduck 20. Hi, Robert. I've been searching all things A Song of Ice and Fire, and I can't find any connection between the Faith Militant and Sir Bonifer Hasty and his Holy 100. Do you know if they are part of the Faith Militant? It seems strange to me that they are so devout to the Faith, but seem to take orders from Jaime and not the High Sparrow. Also, could you remind us all on what happened between this seemingly minor character and Princess Rhaella Targaryen? I feel bad for the guy. Right, so this is a book-only character. Quite an interesting one. Yes, he's a minor character, but he's quite an interesting one. So he was indeed... he was a knight who was a very good knight. He won a tourney, and he fell in love with Rhaella Targaryen, who was the wife of the Mad King. This was before she was married to Aerys. So they had a brief dalliance. We don't know all of the details of it, but she also seemed to love him or care about him. But it wasn't to be. It couldn't be because the king Aerys wanted to marry his sister, and there were all these prophecies about it, and his father wanted it. So that's what happened. They got married. So what does this poor guy do, Bonifer Hasty? Well, he seems to then devote himself to the Faith of the Seven. He's still a knight, and he devotes himself to the maiden, one of the aspects of it, because no woman's love could replace Rhaella other than the face of God herself, the maiden. So that's the feeling that we get here. And then he created this, what he calls the Holy 100. This is well before the start of these stories. He creates this group of knights who are all very devout, and they are not attached technically. They are not the faith militant. They're not attached to the faith. They are just a group of knights who all happen to be devout. So that is how they seem to have got around this fact that the faith, when they were set up, could not have a military arm. They did not work for the faith. They just happened to all be very faithful people. Now, this this Holy Hundred, led by Sir Bonifer, then were on Renly's side, I think, and then they moved on to Stannis' side, and then eventually they came over to the Lannister side, effectively, and that's where they're at. When Jaime goes into the Riverlands, one of the groups of people who goes with him is Bonifer and his Holy Hundred, and you get this it's really interesting. Jaime's chapters when he's going into the Riverlands are really interesting, really fun, because he slowly is shedding himself of all of these kind of Lannister influences as he goes. And one of the ones he just wants to get rid of, he clearly does not enjoy. He does not like having Sir Bonifer around, being ever so holier than thou all the time, and also because he's clearly there under instructions from the Lannisters. So he leaves him and the Holy Hundred at Harrenhal and said, hold Harrenhal for me. And he carries on. So what the role of the Holy Hundred is going to be almost certainly is that they are going to be the people there who are of the faith of the Seven, holding Harrenhal when other people try and get it. Lots of people will try and get it. And eventually I suspect that we will probably find... longer term, we're probably going to get Cersei, and Euron may well be heading that way, but that's a lot more speculative. In the short term, no, they are not going to be, they are not attached to the official faith of the Seven. Now, the question is, if they were called upon, what would they do? I suspect they would see that as a higher calling than following the Lannisters, particularly if Cersei Lannister has blown up the Great Sept of Baelor. They are not going to remain loyal to the Lannisters. In fact, they're quite the opposite. They're going to see this as some sort of holy quest to be bringing Cersei to justice. So Jaime has left them there, but I don't think it's the last we've seen of them. Question from Lady Eternal. The accusations against Queen Marjorie Tyrell in the books have strong parallels to the allegations levied against Anne Boleyn in real life. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, including that the singers accused of being her lovers, when interrogated under torture, named their respective queen's brothers as being their lovers also, and incest being added to the charges. Anne Boleyn was tried by the peerage, who convicted her for political reasons. Marjorie has requested a trial by the faith. Do you think this difference will affect the outcome of Marjorie's fate? Personally, I think that Marjorie's fate, whatever it might be, is not going to be that different to what happened in the books ultimately. I suspect that the High Sparrow is playing a clever game. He clearly is not wishing to fully endorse King Tommen, but if he can be convinced that Marjorie is being penitent and is going to be the kind of the queen that he wants, and Tommen is going to be the kind of king he wants, then yes, he will give his blessing to that. But I think that the whole thing is going to be blown up, probably quite literally, by Cersei before it gets anywhere. We've got I don't know how many, when I was trying to work out what's going to happen in the Winds of Winter, by how big is it going to be, we're going to have a few Cersei chapters in King's Landing before Aegon arrives, and surely in that she has to come up against both the Tyrells and the Faith of the Seven, and that has to be dealt with in the first few chapters of Cersei during this book. I don't think that it's going to matter. I think Marjorie Tyrell is not long for this world. Sylvester Snow saying, hi Robert, does the faith pay a tax to the crown? Are they exempt? Yeah, I think I've covered that one, but yeah, they do not pay taxes, so they are exempt. Bride of Fire. Hi Robert and Dan. We know that Tyene Sand was sent to infiltrate the faith and get close to the High Sparrow. How do you think they will play into Doran's plans, whether knowingly or unknowingly? Okay, let's get into the Martells. Right now, Doran is playing what he thinks is quite a clever game, and he's trying to work out which horse to back. Now, he has got Myrcella Baratheon, obviously the other daughter of Cersei, the other child of Cersei, and he is now sending her back to King's Landing with two of the Sand Snakes, Nymeria and Tyene. Now, Nymeria, he is sending ostensibly to, yes, return Myrcella, but also to claim the seat on the small council that Oberyn Martell, who was her father, had before, and then lost, obviously, when he died and was killed by the Mountain. Tyene, he is sending in disguise as a scepter, saying, basically, I don't really know what's going on with the Faith of the Seven right now. This new High Sparrow is clearly doing things very differently. The Faith militant are there. Try and get close to the High Sparrow, find out what's going on. So that's the sort of the plot, or that bit of the plot. He's also sent Arianne, his daughter, to try and see what's going on with Vaegon's invasion. He's also previously sent Quentyn, his son, to go over and try and win over Dany and marry her. That plan has not gone well. So he's sending out lots of people all over the place to do lots of different things. With this mission to King's Landing, it strikes me as being Doran working on a couple of levels. So yes, definitely he wants to get somebody on the small council. He wants to know what's happening with the Lannisters. He's definitely sending Tyene to spy on the High Sparrow to find out what's going on there. But also we have to be aware that both of the Sand Snakes had been plotting to be doing all sorts of things, to be gaining revenge for their father's death, and he even locked them up because they were going to go off and try and kill all of the Lannisters and put Myrcella onto the throne and tempt the Lannisters into Dorne and then attack the Lannisters. They had lots of plots going on, and basically he had to lock them up to prevent them from doing these things. So when he's letting them go, actually, I think he's probably very aware that they are going to try and kill Cersei and any other Lannisters that they can get their hands on. So I think that, yes, he's sending them ostensibly on the reasons that he gave, but also knowing that they are going to that they will not be able to help themselves for trying to kill the people who they blame for lots of deaths in the Martell family. But then there's another layer, which is that if Cersei destroys the Great Sept, she will definitely, even if she doesn't do it that way, she's definitely going to try and get rid of the High Sparrow. If Tyene is close to the High Sparrow, then she's going to be in danger as well. Nobody's going to know who she is, and that will be another Martell potentially killed by a Lannister. This is going to if we thought that this was that the Martells hated the Lannisters before, they will hate them so many more times afterwards. Another Martell killed by the Lannisters, and Doran will put all of his effort into killing Cersei and getting her out. And I think that means he's going to push all of his support behind Fagon and that invasion of King's Landing. So I think this is the upshot of all of this, is that this is going to be pushing Doran Martell and Dorne to support Fagon. Mara Lee, as I answered this one earlier actually for you, Mara, about the blowing up the Great Sept. And as I said, I thought it was a fantastic scene in the show, and I do hope that they get replicate it in the books in some way. Lady Eternal saying, good time zone, Robert. All of the religions on A Song of Ice and Fire seem to have real-world counterparts. The real-world counterpart of the Faith of the Seven seems to be the Catholic Church, with the High Septon being analogous to the Pope, the Great Sept to the Vatican, the Faith Militant to the Jesuits, and so on. If that is true, then does that make the High Towers analogous to the Medici family? And if so, what does that mean for possible influence the High Towers may start to exert in the next 2 books, especially if Cersei does execute a plan of attack of some kind that decimates the higher ranks of the faith in King's Landing? So the High Towers, interesting. So yes, there are analogies across from the real world to things in George R. R. Martin's world, but they are not cut and paste. He's taking inspirations from, rather than just saying this is exactly that. So the High Towers aren't exactly like the Medicis, but yes, you can see some similarities there. The High Towers are going to be very focused in the short term, I expect, with Euron and an attack on Old Town. So I think that's what's going to be focusing their attention to a large degree. However, there is an intriguing possibility that they may be tied in with Aegon's invasion. The Golden Company talk mysteriously about friends in the Reach writing off to ask for help. Who could their friends in the Reach be? Well, there's only 3 really, or 4 possibly really important families there. We've got the Tyrells, got the Tarleys, got the Red Wines, who've got this huge fleet, and you've got the High Towers. So it's possible that this is the High Towers have got links already across to Fagon. The High Towers will be, out of all of the families, they've got a glass candle going on. There's a good chance that they will already know what's going on. And if Cersei, as seems to be the case, turns herself against the Faith of the Seven, then yes, given the High Towers' historic connections with the faith, this would mean that they would be very much likely to turn against her. So that seems to be the case of what's going on with the High Towers. Henning J, I have a quick Winds of Winter question on how the story of the High Sparrow will eventually end. I assume he will have to die because he gets too uncompromising. Could it be that Randall Tarley and his troops from the Reach could clash with the Faith Militant in King's Landing, since Randall Tarley is not exactly a fan of the High Sparrow and his followers? Yes. Crock and Tacos, I just spotted in the chat one of my excellent moderators. Thank you so much. I know you just have to head off. So Andrew K, Chrissy of Old Stones as well, my other excellent moderators I can see there. Thank you guys for all you do. You are the best. So I really do appreciate all that you do. But to return to this question here from Henning, so could Randall Tarley clash with the Faith Militant? Now, this is the soldiers in King's Landing. It's quite interesting because, or the makeup of the soldiers, there aren't many Lannisters. This is something that you might expect, given the fact that effectively the Lannisters are in control. There aren't many. The main Lannister army is in the Riverlands. Jaime has been going out trying to sort out the Riverlands. Obviously, they've still got some back in Casterly Rock. There are the Gold Cloaks, who are the city guard, but the biggest garrison there at the moment is from the Reach, the Tyrells, the Tarleys. Now, that means that actually Cersei has to keep the Tyrells and Tarleys on her side, or otherwise she's got very little chance of holding on to King's Landing. Now, might the Tarleys turn against the faith? I think it's possible, but I think the bigger way that this is going to go down is that the Lannisters turn against the faith, and we have this intriguing possibility, or possibilities of the word. We get this throwaway remark in one of the Arianne chapters, the pre-release chapters from the Winds of Winter, where we hear that the Tyrell army, Mace Tyrell, is marching his army down towards Storm's End. This is a very odd thing to hear, because why on earth would he be doing that? Yes, the army had been there, it had been besieging it for a long time, and then they went back up to King's Landing. But why, given everything that's happening in King's Landing, would the Tyrell army head down there? My best guess is that they are quitting the capital to go and actually not attack the forces of Fagon, but join up with them. I think that is much more likely. So the Tarleys, I think, for the time being, will be staying there. They did it well. Intriguingly, on the show, the Tarleys shifted to support the Lannisters, which is possible. Yes, Randall Tarley doesn't like the Faith of the Seven, so maybe he might side with her. Maybe Mace will quit the capital and Randall will stay there and will side with Cersei. It's possible, but we haven't seen the evidence for that yet. Mace Tyrell doesn't love the Lannisters. There's no great love or admiration there. He did have admiration for Tywin Lannister, but for Cersei, it's less clear. It would just be what she could offer him. She could offer him to be effectively to take over from the Tyrells and Highgarden, and actually be the most powerful family down in the Reach. So that would be the only reason I think that they would switch over. Question from Eric Fug. Let me just double check I've not missed any particular questions in the chat. I think I'm up to date there at the moment. Eric Fug, for Lancel, what happens after testifying against Cersei? Does she explode him with wildfire, or does he get smashed by Robert Strong? Yeah, either of those. She's gonna kill Lancel for everything, really. She will blame him for a huge amount. Yes, that's I think the most likely thing is that he just gets caught up in whatever it is when Cersei lashes out and attacks everybody who has been against her. And my personal guess is that will be with some huge explosion at the Great Sept. Guys, I've got one more question from my patrons I've just spotted. I've been rattling through them. So now is a good time to drop any more questions into the chat. I will try and pick up as many of them as I can in just one moment. I'll just do my last question from here. Actually, before I do that, I forgot midstream. What I normally do is thank my patrons. Patrons, thank you. I'll do it a little bit later in this time. Patrons, thank you for your support. I genuinely can't do what I do without the support of my patrons. That's why I try and give back as much as I can to my patrons. If you become a patron of Deep Geek, there are a number of different levels, and there's a number of different perks and things that you get at those different levels. So at $5, for example, you get access to all of the audio that I produce. At $10, you get a thank you down in the description of all of my videos. You get a chance to vote on some things that I've got planned coming up. I've got another vote I'm going to put to my patrons at some point, on my $10 plus patrons at some point in the next week or two, just trying to work out the future of live streams. So I'm going to ask a few questions just to get a feel for what people are wanting. And all patrons get priority questions here for live streams. So if you want to support the channel, if you fancy some of those benefits, there's a link down in the description. I think with that, I will jump back into my final question from my patrons, which is from Mara Lee, saying, if Bran does become king of the 6 or 7 kingdoms, he clearly follows the old gods and is a greenseer. What do you see happening to the faith of the 7 as the main religion in the last books? Will it remain as the main religion, or will people be needing to follow the old gods from now on after Bran ascends the throne, so to speak? So I think that the faith of the 7 is going to turn from being the in the last 2 books is going to turn from being the established faith to a faith at a lot more of a ground level. So we're going to get a lot more focus just on the septons and scepters out there, rather than the faith as an establishment. So I think that that's where we're going with the story. But then if Bran does ascend to the Iron Throne at the end of all this, what does he say? Okay, now everyone has to worship the trees. I think actually not. I think that the old gods, the worship of the old gods, they actually don't care huge amounts whether people subscribe to the belief or not. So I think that Bran would probably be okay with the faith of the 7, which is, as we've been saying, quite an inoffensive religion in many ways, just carrying on. He wouldn't, I suspect, want the worship of R'hllor to be particularly supported, because they're far too focused on fire, and trees don't tend to like fire, and obviously they tend to think that the worship of the old gods is just all about worshipping the great other in some way or other. The faith of the 7 doesn't tend to think that. They think that the old gods is wrong, but they've lived very happily in coexistence with that. The swearing things by the old gods and the new is just the way that the 7 kingdoms have worked. So my take is that actually, if Bran / the Weirwood Network do gain power at the end of the books, that he wouldn't bother to change things. He would allow the faith of the 7 to carry on. It doesn't affect the Weirwood Network at all. Reflective Rambling, thank you so much for the super chat. Picking something up for Turbo. Thank you. I'd love it when people do this, picking up things for other questions, for other people in the chat. Are you still doing a Traveler's Guide to Middle-earth? I still love the idea. I did a Traveler's Guide. If you're new to the channel, didn't come across it, I did the Traveler's Guide to Westeros, which was an epic length thing. I think it took me nearly 2 years. I went through Westeros and Essos, just trying to get to describe the places in Westeros, but at a ground level, at an experiential level. What's it like to walk up to these great castles? How high are the walls? What do they smell like? What's the atmosphere inside? That kind of thing. And I really enjoyed doing it. I think that the next step for the Traveler's Guides actually is I'm going to turn them into an audio book. So keep an eye out for that if you liked them. I'm going to try and splice them all together and actually turn it into an audio book. So that's next. In terms of doing a Traveler's Guide to Middle-earth, lots of people have asked me to do it. I am very much looking forward to it. I think the one thing I've said before that I'm just trying to work my way around is the Tolkien estate are very hot on copyright on things, particularly people writing things that might come across as fan fiction. The Traveler's Guide is could veer towards more fictionalized version than just a normal description of places. So that's something I'm just very aware of, and I'm trying to work through the issues there. But as an idea, yes, I love it, and I definitely would like to get into doing that at some point. Let's have a quick flick through question, see if there's anything else here. Ryan Larkin, thank you for saying nice things about the Traveler's Guide and other people as well. Andrew Kay asking, what role do you think the rainbow symbol has on the origins and influence of the faith of the seven colors, high septum, prism, crown, crystals, repeated patterns of seven, biblical analog as well? Yeah, I mean, it's seven is clearly, obviously, with the seven colors of the rainbow is clearly there. They make good use of prism. I talked about the stained glass. Within septs are quite often seven-sided, and so then the light sort of comes in through the different stained glass windows at different times of the day. I don't think the sort of the rainbow thing is something that George R. Martin plays on hugely, but yes, the idea with the crystals, and they do often have like this, the crystal crown and things like that, is definitely there. And seven is just, it's one of those numbers that as humans, and I'm sure psychologists among us would be able to sort of give us a better understanding of this, but 3 works for us as a number, which seems to resound with us. If you're telling a joke, you always tell the joke on the 3rd beat and so on. 7 is another one of those numbers that also seems to work for us. And I think George R. R. Martin tied in with that. Any more questions? No, I think Sasak saying, random thought, there are 7 gemstone emperors if you count until the amethyst empress, not the bloodstone. Is that only a coincidence, or did Hugo know? I think that's a coincidence, I have to say. But yes, it's George R. Martin does put a lot into this, but my general take is that it attempts to take the 7 motif and apply it thematically to other elements of the world of a Song of Ice and Fire, particularly elements that are very associated with other things like the Stark family and the rest of it. I think that those aren't particularly where George R. R. Martin has been going. I think those things are coincidences rather than anything else. And similarly, I think the like with the gemstone emperors over in the Great Empire of the Dawn and all the rest of it. Okay, I think at that I will probably pull well, just very quickly, Robinson 88 asking, do I think Maegor's fight was just? If you had to take a side, which do you think overstepped their boundaries first? I don't think Maegor did much that was just, and I don't think he did many things for his own, for the greater good of the 7 kingdoms, but similarly, I don't think that this is a thing to go to war over, so I don't think either side were in the right on that. But with that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this one to a close. Next week, we'll probably look at the faith of the drowned god. I think that's where we're going to go next week, and that will tie in with the conversation I had with Amanda about Patchface. So have a look out for that one as well. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. Some fantastic questions. It's a fascinating religion that often gets dismissed because there's not much magic going on with it, but I think it's central to the plot of this story going on. If you're interested in more of these live streams and you're watching a little bit later, there will be a link appearing somewhere around here. If you're watching, if you would like to support this channel, if you'd like to get access to some of my Patreon-only benefits, there will be a link appearing somewhere around here. Okay, that's all. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you again next week.